talk about, are you gonna switch now into processing and pricing?
No, we're staying on the pooling side
On the
today.
pooling?
Yeah,
Okay.
but we're going to switch from the federal program to
Oh, other
state
state.
programs.
Yep.
So we're going to look now primarily at the main program as an example, as a basis for how the state of Vermont might take action, and contrast the difference between the two markets, and make some reference to what's going on in Pennsylvania and Virginia, and partly to your question before, Jackie, and with the hope that as I go forward, I'll be able to provide you some more comprehensive information about those programs, and that includes California too. But for now, for the rest of the morning, we'll look at the main program, and then we'll look at how the Vermont program pool might work based on the basic construct of the federal order and how that's been adapted at the state level in Maine. So that's what we'll talk about for the remainder of my presentation. So in terms of Maine has three different overorder programs. They have a basic overorder premium that they call the Milk Commission premium. In addition to that, there's a producer margin payment. And the third is the milk handler fee. It really gets the most attention for legitimate reasons. The reason it gets the most attention is the pricing side, and we'll get into that more next meeting. But in terms of the pooling part, there are three different programs. Back to our basic construct, what is the objective of the main order? And then how does the pooling work? And my market area, supply, classified use and pricing, uniform minimum, those are federal order principles. They adapt reasonably well, not totally well, as you'll see, but they do provide your benchmarks for putting the picture together. Okay, so now we start with the objective. Julie gave us really good statements for each of these. So the first one is the Milk Commission premium. That's the overorder price. Dates back to 1935. And it's really a class one overorder premium. You want to make sure in the middle that there's a reliable supply of class one fluid milk to the state. So, and that means the plants in Maine have enough milk, enough raw milk to assure that the residents of Maine have a sufficient supply of drinking milk, same as the federal order. So as the first paragraph says, there's dislocation in the market that requires the state to step in. They've done that, and they had a state order since the 30s. The other piece that's important to note is that not only do they have the authority to price the milk that goes in the bottle, they actually down here, they also have the authority to price minimum retail and wholesale prices too. So their regulatory authority extends from the farm to the store shelf. So that's an important distinction. Then the second of the three is the producer margin, different from the overorder price. This dates back to 1983 and has a very different purpose. It's established as an adjustment for Maine conditions. So it's not, in terms of purpose, tied to the class one sales for purpose. It's tied to recognizing that marketing conditions in Maine are different. So it's a cost of production adjustment on the farm to reflect Maine conditions. So the purpose is very different. It's for the production of the milk rather than its use. Now, the second paragraph identifies that it only relates to the milk dealer's use of class one milk and distribution for sales in Maine, and only distributed to Maine farmers. So you're only talking about the Maine farmers adjusting for their cost of production And so this, Nick, gets to your point a little bit. You know, there's a recognition that there's going to have some impact on the market that you got to pay attention to. So this only deals with milk that is produced in Maine and used in Maine, sold in Maine. That's the basis of the producer margin.
Does this cover organic milk, Dan? Does this cover organic
Yeah, I
milk?
understand. I don't know the answer to that, Jackie.
Okay.
If it's, I'm not aware that there must be some producer farm-based plants that are using organic milk and selling that in Maine, and whether it applies to them, I don't know. The organic milk plants are out of state, right? So it doesn't apply to them.
But this says it's for milk produced in Maine. So that's why I think I understand that on the handler fee, but
it's the second paragraph, it's each milk dealer's class. It's applied to the Maine milk dealers. It's not applied to out-of-state milk dealers. It's only the in-state.
okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and down at the bottom, this premium's gotten as high as $1.68. And it's still around that much in terms of the actual charge, but what it pays back to the farmers has gone down based on the reduction of Class 1 sales in Maine, which you'll see in a slide. So those are kind of the three elements to the producer margin. So we have the overorder premium, Class 1 sales. We have the producer margin, more production, but it's still only on the Class 1 sales in the state of Maine. And then the third is the tier payment. And the tier payment is, again, a matter of cost of production. It's not related to the supply in the Class 1 market. It's the cost of production. And this one is on all milk production in the state, however it's used. It doesn't matter where the products made out of this milk go. All of the Maine milk production, the total volume, receives a tier payment. So I summarize those. You have the overorder price for the fluid milk supply in-state products. You have the producer margin, cost of production, and you have the tier program, all of the milk, regardless of use. The blue is me. This is the one thing I kind of characterize a little bit. The others are all taken out of Julie's, the law and Julie's presentation. So you have, essentially at the bottom, Maine is trying to hold on to an in-state supply of its fluid milk, beverage milk for the state. And they're also have two programs that are also in addition promote to assure farm viability. They're obviously interconnected, but that's, if you dig into their statutes, it's, the impact on the infrastructure, if you lose the farms, jobs, all the rest of it, different from your just plain fluid milk. So there's a major distinction between the federal order and Maine. The federal order is only maintaining a Class 1 supply. That's what is the statutory, at least it's been interpreted. The only thing the federal order now is doing is to maintain the supply, maintaining farm viability for itself, independent of that. It's not in the federal order, but it is in the state order. So it's a very important distinction in terms of the objective of the state order. Okay, here's our marketing area. It's solely the state of Maine. The pricing construct only deals with milk sales and production in the state of Maine. To your point, Nick, from a basic construct, there's nothing in the program that is involved with pricing products that go out of state. There is a calculation of the impact of the sale of those products out of state. And the state has made a policy decision to stay out of that. They're only dealing with the in-state, except for the tier program. The tier program, since it applies to all milk production in the state, is indirectly involved in raising the procurement price of some of their products that go out of state. So that is the one distinction, and that's a relatively new distinction in the last 10 years. Okay, so what does the supply in Maine look like for the plants that are subject to the regulation in Maine? The basic defining features of the Maine milk business, on the right side, there's two big, relatively large scale fluid milk plants in the state. One is a Hood plant, and the second is the Oakhurst plant. Used to be an independent plant, still called Oakhurst, but it got bought out by Dean, and now it's owned by DFA. So DFA owns one plant in Maine, and Hood owns the other plant in Maine. The volume of milk is the left arrow. That the pooled milk going into Maine, coming from Maine producers and going into Maine milk plants, 557 million pounds of milk. Some of that milk goes out of state, but most of that milk is staying in state. So a pretty closed market, not completely, but pretty closed supply and utilization of that volume of milk in the state of Maine. It's only 2 plants, so it's difficult to talk about exactly how much milk they're using in Maine, because you start to, you're just talking about 2 plants. So you can't really say, oh, here are these plants and you're starting to talk about those 2 plants. So some volume of that is going out of state to the DFA plant down in Boston, but most of it, and increasingly the predominant amount of the milk, is staying right up in Maine. So they have a nice, well-constructed class 1 market in Maine. They have plants that supply the market, and they have farms that supply the plants, and they're relatively close by to the plants compared to other parts of the order. If I had more time to get into that, but we don't. The other
You
piece,
mean the farms are located near the plants?
yeah.
You'd think those plants would be down in the Portland.
They are, but the mileage from where the supply is, not that far, not that far. Yeah,
So Maine doesn't pretty much ever have to import either fluid milk or components.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. There, at sometimes some cream comes out of the St. Albans plant, but not too often. The supply is pretty stable. So there are some non-pool plants, small processing plants. Pineland Creamery is the old Grants plant up in Bangor. Is a nonprofit doing a lot of really innovative experimental work. Bolton Dairy is a small farm, a little bit like Stratford Dairy here. Smiling Hill, same thing. Is small plants. I'm not totally sure. I'm pretty sure they're basically producer handler plants, but they're a little bit bigger than farmstead plants. They're selling a pretty good sized commercial market. Like Monument Farms, that type of plant. There aren't too many of them. If you look, you see there are 177 federal order plants, producers that supply federal order plants in Maine. And again, it's difficult to identify the number in between the federal order plants and the so plus or minus 10 non-federal order farms in Maine. So, and then Julie identified also that Maine, as Vermont, is starting to increasing smaller producer handlers, would be small bottling plants that are selling in a very localized market, and developing artisanal market in Maine as well, but nothing compared to the scale in Vermont. So that's their basic pool supply configuration. So now we get into the classified use, and it's primarily those 2 federal order pool plants that are subject to this price regulation, because that's most of the milk. So again, we have 3 of those. One is only involved in the in-state class 1 sales. The second is involved in all the Maine milk production. So 3 programs, 2 pretty different configurations in terms of how the use is classified and priced.
Could you go back to the previous slide? So they utilize 557 million pounds.
In the federal order
And,
plants.
and they produce 565?
Yeah, plus or minus. Again, 10 million pounds of milk, 10 farms, difficult to identify a number. So plus or minus. Yeah.
But I thought our numbers here in Vermont is we utilize what, 70% of our milk right here in Vermont.
Yeah. So we'll get to that. Yeah. Yep.
So we're close.
Yep. We're doing a comparative analysis and see what they've done in Maine might apply to Vermont. So keep that thought in mind. With these, you're dealing with your class 1 sales, and they have substantially more class 1 sales because they have more people. They have one set of premiums that are organized around those sales. Then they have a third one that's not organized around the sales, is organized around the production, not the sales. Okay, and how is that going to apply to our configuration? Okay, so now here's what their configuration actually looks like. They have, and I did this in terms of population, consumption per person of fluid milk, because that's what their pricing is configured around. Nets out to those two numbers, and you can see the reduction in the use in the state from 255 million pounds of milk in 2000 to 190,000, and the population's gone up a little bit. So even though the population's gone up, the consumption's gone down, right? And it's because the per person consumption has gone down by 25%, more than 25% in the intervening time. The net consequence is pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
The in-state use gone from 50%. So at that point, you can pay 50 cents on the dollar if you're pricing just the milk sales in the state, to 33%. You can only pay 33% on the dollar if you're pricing just the sales in state. Okay, so that's an absolute important benchmark number. Used to be 50%, now 33% on the dollar. On the other hand, the tier program, because it's all of the milk produced in the state, is paid on all the milk. It doesn't matter where the production is used ultimately, they're paying on all the milk. So if 33% is being used in state, that means 67% is going out of state. Some of it is going in raw milk form, and some of it's going in packaged milk form. So Nick, there's your packaged milk going out of state. So there's some impact. The numbers are there to be identified, but because there's only 2 plants, it's difficult to talk about. But there is clearly some packaged milk that's being manufactured in the processed in the state of Maine, being sold into the Boston milk market, that the 2 overorder premiums are not affecting. There may be some indirect effect, but that milk is not, and products not being priced. But the tier milk, the tier program milk that goes into those package is. So they're paying farmers on packaged milk sales that's going out of state, because the dealers are paying for the handler fee for the tier program.
So
Jackie's getting ready to
in
raise very
Maine,
politely, Jackie.
I'm
there's
sorry.
no manufacturing like of cheese or whey or
Correct.
ice cream, none of
There you are, right? It's all going on that,
all fluid.
all into those 2 plants. Yeah, so, okay, Jackie and then Nick.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, I see that the export out of state has greatly increased. So there's 67% being 67%, let's say, being paid on that. But look at the amount of increase of production from 2000 to 21. I mean, that just it still waters that premium down. I'm kind of surprised that production has gone up that high. And the other thing I was wondering was how many
That's a good
farms
point.
have they
Very,
lost
very good point.
that
Yep.
amount?
Sorry?
Yeah. So
Oh, yeah. Okay. Nick.
Yeah, I think just related to that, maybe spend more time with dynamics of this green box here. I mean, I would look at this and say maybe that's evidence that the pool producer margin and the overorder pricing are driving sales out of the state. So maybe that's not true, but that's something to kind of like unpack, because that's an assumption that you might lead to. And then the other question I had, Dan, was who pays the tier program pricing, or that tier, who pays for the tier program? Who pays for the tier program? I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so I to your first question, I feel, based on the discussions with the folks in Maine, that the pricing is not what's driving the sales out of state. It's the reduction in fluid consumption in the state. And to Jackie's point, it's diluted because the production's going up at the same time. And I think you could do an analysis and conclude that those two factors are the primary drivers and almost the complete drivers of that, not the sales going out of state. The third element is the wholesale and retail pricing mechanism in the state that the accounts for the increase in the procurement price for the sales in state. So that element is protective of the plants in Maine in addition. And again, we'll talk about that when we get to the pricing. But so I think, you know, I want to be careful not to disagree with you, number one, but I think from a analytical standpoint, it's pretty safe, Nick, that's the dynamic, not the pricing is driving the product out of sales. As far as who's paying the milk handlers in the state, same people. Those two milk plants are paying the handler fee.
Great.
Okay, so this is sort of a summary that what is currently available for the state over order, the two programs are paying 33 cents on the dollar. And that's my calculation that I did before, but you'll see down the bottom left, it's confirmed by Julie's presentation that the producer margin charge is $1.04, and they're paying 33% of that. So it does the calculation translates to what's actually going on. It's basically 30, it's just the numbers. It's 33% of what they're using in state is what's available to pay per producer. So the processors are charged $1.04 on all their milk sales in the state against the total volume of production that the producer sees 34 cents of that $1.04 over order. On the other hand, the producers see the whole that the handlers are charged X amount, and that money, because they see all of that.
And have the people in Maine, or to Senator Brock's point too, it's appropriate to Vermont, what would happen if there was consolidation and these fluid milk plants went out of business? Or, like, how vulnerable are these programs to that sort of scenario?
Let's see if I could show. No, I guess I took out to Bobby's point, the plants are in Portland. So there is a clear discussion. DFA owns the Oakhurst plant in Portland. They own the plant in Boston. To the extent that there's milk coming out of the Portland plant going into Boston, and there's milk coming out of the Boston plant going into Boston, do they have excess capacity in the market? And so that was an issue with the Dean bankruptcy, that DFA ended up owning both of those plants. So it's an issue in the milk business that hasn't settled out yet. To this point, the Oakhurst plant it's an issue, but to this point, it seems stable. But it's definitely, you raise an issue for sure. Yeah, that the Maine folks are clearly aware of. Okay, to just mechanics, and this is from Julie. The two programs, TIER and the poop money. On the one hand, this is to your question as well, Nick. The over order price, the money, the processors pay the money to the Department of Agriculture. The milk commission's housed in the Department of Agriculture. Money goes in at $1.04. Calculations are done. Money goes back out to the dealers at 34 cents, and they pay their producers. So money in, money out. But it's from the processors to the department, and department to the farmers. The TIER program, the money is paid into the general fund. The dealers pay the money into the general fund. And the general fund, under a separate statute, pays the money out to the producers as a subsidy. And we'll get into this more in the pricing discussion. The amount that goes in is not the same as the amount that goes out. So the general fund at times has to make up a difference because the amount that's guaranteed at, again, the producers are getting the money. It's not diluted. The general fund is required to make up the difference at some time. And for that reason, it's a separate check. It's not in the monthly milk check like this is. It comes out as a separate check because it's all completely separate program. It's an important distinction.
So, does the farmer receive 33 cents
As
plus 15 cents? So it'd be,
No, they're getting they're out of the three programs. I left out the third program. The overorder price is the department and the handlers together figure out how much each handler should pay the farmers. That money doesn't go to the department and back to the farm to the handlers. Stays in the handlers, they pay the farmers. That's program one. This is program two. Money goes to from handlers to the department back to the handlers to the farmers. Program three, money goes handlers to the general fund to the producer. Program one is $1.50 blended off at 33%.
Yeah.
Program two, $1.04 blended off at 33%. Handler fee is the tier payments. That's absolute tier payments. The handler fee goes into the general fund in one amount, but what comes out is 100% of the tier payments. So we'll get into it in the pricing, but that one, Bobby, can be $2 and $3 a hundredweight. The tier payments.
the tiered thing?
Oh yeah.
Ooh.
Oh yeah. No, that's the big payment you
Because
make.
I thought I saw where they paid 15 cents on the tier.
No, what you saw was 15. I don't know what you saw. I can't answer that one. I'm just gonna have to let that one. I can't go back through the slides.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
Go up. No,
Okay.
move forward.
Okay. So just a very quick initial introduction to impact. Back to federal order slide. We talked about this a little bit. They've still lost substantial number of farms. The tier program went into effect like 2012. So that number's really, the first one's not so much an issue on the first slide. They're still lost a fair number of farms, but relative percentage, you'll see in a minute. Milk production's gone up, to your point, Jackie. And as a result, their percentage of the federal orders has stayed relatively constant. This is Julie's. She went through all the different states from when in the last couple of years, and from Delaware has lost the most farms percentage-wise, and Maine has lost the fewest, other than Connecticut. So, and Vermont's just above. So we've since 2017, Vermont's lost 21%, Maine's lost 13%. So. So that's and Connecticut has great programs too. They really do. Different than regulation. It's more on the tax side. So, okay. So big change here now to Vermont. And how does what's been done in Maine affect how we might do something in Vermont? Same, start with the objective, go into pooling. Look at the two options, overorder premium versus a tier program. Overorder premium, regulation, department to farmer, tier program, regulation. Really, it's a fee rather than a regulation into the general fund to farmers. That issue's more on the pricing side, but those are the two options available to Vermont. First question, what is the objective? Well, the objective can't be to get at the fluid milk sales in the state. So we make 4 or 5 times as much milk as Maine, and we have fewer people. So the overall net's 4% instead of 33%. So you're not going to get anywhere assessing the class one market in Vermont. So, and there's no need to assure an adequate supply of milk in the state. We only have one fluid milk plant, Hood. It's not really all of the fluid milk sales in the state. So, totally different configuration every way you look at it in the state of Vermont. So that's not an objective. So what might be the objective? So I to get at the objective, I thought really the starting point is the marketing area in Vermont is very different. And this is back to your, what you said before, Bobby. What Vermont is doing now is using the milk in the state. So the marketing area is this range of manufactured plants, plus the one fluid milk bottling plant, plus, the producer, handlers, and farmstead plants in state. So you're looking at the use of milk in state. That's sort of like a federal order, because you got a lot of manufacturing plants in your state, some fluid sales, but it's very different than what's going on in Maine. So the application of Maine to Vermont doesn't really work, other than the handler fee, which gets at production, to begin with, and the producer margin, which gets at cost of production. But the configuration is totally different. So that's the beginning. And here, John, here are the plants, right there. And these are the federal order plants. Well, so we have a variety of plants making a variety of products. And when I looked at it, we're now making all the products in the state.
All for.
We're like a federal order. The state is now making, and class 3, Agamark said Cabot's making 1 billion pounds of cheese. I mean, that's a lot of cheese. And that's a big chunk of the state. Ice cream, number 2, Ben & Jerry's, big part of the state. Yogurt, Commonwealth, big part of the state. DFA, butter powder, big part of the state. So we're covering, and Booth Brothers, class 1. We have a diversified business, processing manufactured business. These are the pool plants, the federal order pool plants in Vermont. Maine has 2. We have whatever that adds up to. Thomas is gone. Some of the others are gone because 2019. But it's a lot more plants here in the state of Vermont. Then we go to the basic construct of the state. Maine is 550 odd billion pounds. Down at the bottom is what's going into Vermont plants. The total is almost 2 billion pounds of milk. 2 billion pounds of milk versus 550 being used. But most of it's manufactured product. Almost all, other than Booth, it's all manufactured products. So that's, benchmark, almost 2 billion pounds of milk being used in state now. It's 80% of the milk that's produced in most of the Vermont milk is federal order pool milk, 80%. Some of it's coming from New York State. You see later, it's 365 against, there it is, 20% is coming from outside the state and 80% of it's in state. Most of it's in state. So Maine is in state fluid raw milk production going into those plants. Vermont is now 80% of the milk in state.
So
big change, Bob. I mean, it's a transforming change.
I have a big question though. We're utilizing all this milk in our manufacturing.
Yep.
The price of milk paid to the farmer for class 3 is the highest, or right next to class 1, the farmer price paid.
Yeah.
So with that price being up in the $26 or $7 range,
Yeah.
if pricing makes a big difference on whether people are going to buy it or not, our sales should be plummeting, because the price in the last few months has gone pretty high compared to where it was. So and farmers are somewhat happy with the price they're getting today, totally dissatisfied what it was a few months ago. Our Are sales dropping off like flies in the winter?
So let's keep it for pricing and impact.
Yeah,
Okay, hold the question.
well, I want people to think about what we're told and what's actually happening.
Okay, well, hold the thought.
I'll hold the
Okay.
thought.
Okay, so Vermont is 1.6 going into the plants. In 2011, it was 1.2, so it's increased. Into those pool plants is increased. So at that's the backdrop for the federal order supply, right? So got a total supply that stayed relatively constant to the federal order. But what hasn't remained constant, is instead of the milk going out of state to other federal order pool plants, almost half of it between 2011 to 2020 staying as it's not only 80% of the milk is now in state, it's increased over time. The Vermont industry is expanding over time. A big chunk of that's Cabot, but it's a growth business. It's not a static business. Okay, I'm going to move a little quicker because I want to get to the last piece, and so we can hear from Professor Denning. So, in terms of configuration, that's the federal order, and then Diane gave us the in-state. So, total processors in different sizes. We have a lot of very small processors, very, very small processors, 82. 6 is pretty good size number for the state of Vermont of the bigger sizes, and everything in between. You add them all up, there's a lot of plants in the state of Vermont. Back to our farm numbers, different federal order number, 558 as compared to the federal order is 520. So, keep in mind roughly 40 farms that are non-pool plants, according to the state. So 560, 520, those are the two numbers, keep in mind there. Diane gave us, this is the NAS total milk production, not the pool number. Issues of statistics, but just keep in mind that for 2019, 2.7 million, and in the federal order, I don't have it, so you'll see that later. But we have 2.9, and different numbers for NAS are different from the federal orders. Diane gave us those. Diane also broke out the organics and important numbers. She's beginning to break out the on-farm processors. So we've stayed relatively constant around 70. Then she also gave us the milk output. It has the sheep and the goat milk in it, so it's a little hard to tease out. But the net is 125 million pounds of milk that's not in the federal order. That's the net. So, again, I'm trying to figure out between federal order and non-federal order. It's difficult, but there is volume that's not in the federal order. Okay, then she gave us, I just wanted to, so if people want to have some time, there's a lot of plants in Vermont. Like I said, a lot of them are really small, but as you go along, there's some pretty good sized plants in the state too. So there's a lot of plants. Unlike practically any other state in the Northeast, for sure, we have a lot of plants here in the state of Vermont that are using our milk. Vermont is uniquely configured. It really is. Okay, so then, to your point, John, I put up the slide of the pool plants. Now I added some of the non-pool plants. These are the bigger ones. We're starting to have a lot of plants all over the state in a way that we didn't before. So on some level, it's a flourishing industry at this point, which is, is terrific. Okay, so with that in mind, begin to think about what does the objective look like? So do you think about ensuring a stable supply to those plants? So you're looking at the plant supply instead of the consumer interest in the state of Maine, like in Maine. And so then that you can use the model at that point of the other two programs in Maine, which are a cost of production adjustment, and then really what amounts to a cost of production, not just an adjustment, but some attempt to get at the break-even price in Maine is the tier program. We'll get into that on the price side. So, big change on the left side, but some adaptation on the right side. And then I'm, beating the drum that we have to address the environmental costs in all this discussion too. So that's in there in terms of structure as well. Okay, so yeah.
So are we starting to look like a Wisconsin where most of the milk that's, produced say in Wisconsin, is staying in Wisconsin, a lot of it's value added? It seems like that's where we're headed rather than being a big fluid producer for the Boston market.
Yeah, great question, except Wisconsin's not a value added, it's a commodity cheese state, right? So they have some value added cheese production they really went hard at because the value added is worth far more. But in terms of the 25 billion pounds of milk, so, if Cabot's 1 billion pounds by their own representation against 2 billion pounds of total, it's half the value added cheese. And in there is Ben and Jerry's too. And Booth Brothers is in there, theoretically a higher valued product. $1.5 billion and the yogurt, 1.6 billion, something like that. Out of the two, Wisconsin, no way that the value added is a percentage. So yes, internal, but completely different value added versus commodity.
Yeah.
It's a milk business. And to Jackie's point, evolving milk business, right? Okay, so how can we look at the pooling? And now I'm getting to the end here of, I'm a little over Professor Denning. Is he on?
Yes.
I'm almost there. Almost there. So we're looking at in-state and out-of-state. Because we have all this milk coming in from in-state, from the 20%, what do we do with that? And then the amount that's manufactured in-state as against the total, 2 billion against the total of 2.6. What is a pool to net out a producer price how does that work? So start out again by reference to Brian's, these are audited numbers. 2019 he gave us two sets of numbers. 2019 is the numbers I have to use because that's what's in both sets of numbers. So I would like to have used 2020 because things changed obviously, but I don't have the numbers for 2020 in terms of the total. So we're using the 2019, that 80-20 Vermont to New York and the pounds. That's the basic gist of this. Okay, so this is what our pool looks like. The federal order numbers are on the top, and then I've tried to do an all milk with an estimate, and I came out. I crunched, and I got to talk to Diane. I haven't had a chance to do it. Her slide, as I showed before, is 125 million pounds in some combination of goat, sheep, and milk. It doesn't look like there's that. I just can't find more than 50 odd million pounds of milk outside of the federal order. I just can't do it. So that's a straw number. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't move the numbers around very much, but there is some difference between the federal order pool milk is the point. If you incorporate all of the state milk in, you have to account for it on some hint. That's what I'm trying to do at the bottom. And then I use that number for the rest of the slide. So at that point, you're instead of 81.2% in Vermont as compared to out of state, 81.6. It doesn't affect the pool calculation a whole lot. It's still roughly 80-20, but at least we're not just dealing with the federal order. We're also looking at all the milk in the state. Okay, so then this is our pool in-state, Vermont's in-state use. That's what's going into the plants. Total Vermont in the bottom, total Vermont supply estimate is next to where it says NAS.
0.9.
That's the total Vermont supplied to the pool plants now without the New York State milk, the 365. If you look at that against the total of Vermont milk production, right? 62%. That's our pool. So in-state, the volume of milk that's produced in-state that's used by in-state plants is 80%. But against the whole, it's 60%. Okay, that's totally different than Maine, right? So we have in-state use of the whole 60% at this point instead of 30%. Big difference. Okay, so then in this, now we're about ready to talk to Professor Denning. If we were to charge $1 on the dealers on the 2 billion pounds of milk that's being manufactured and processed in the state, and only pay the proceeds of that back to the farmers, you pay to the Vermont farmers, you'd pay 60 cents on the dollar, roughly. Leave aside, what is it going to do to the market? That's just from a pool calculation. The state of Vermont at this point could pay 60 cents on the dollar if it assessed $1 on all the milk sales in the state and only paid that money back to the farmers.
And 40 cents to the milk that's coming in from out of state?
No, 40% to the Vermont milk that's going out of state.
Yeah.
So Vermont is using 1.6 billion pounds in the Vermont plants, but it's producing 2.6 billion pounds of milk total.
Yeah.
So if you assess $1
On the 1.6.
correct, but
Yeah.
it's actually on the 2. You assess, they're using, sorry, I went the wrong way. The plants are using a total down at the bottom, 2 billion pounds of milk.
Yeah.
365 million of that's coming in from New York State, but the plants are using 2 billion. So I need to make this clear in the slide.
Yeah.
The top number is 2 billion, right? You're assessing 2 billion, but you're only paying on the
1.6, I'd say.
No, I'm confusing myself. You did it, Bobby. You got me.
Well, it
You got
looks
me.
like you're collecting on the 1.6, but you're paying out to all the
You're correct.
producers.
That's
at the
correct.
2.6.
The New York, that's why I did these 2 boxes.
Yeah.
I'm getting tired. I'm about to end out of, you're right. Thank you, Senator Stark. That's correct. That would pay out at 62%.
Yeah.
Point being, if you charge on the whole amount,
Yeah.
and pay those farmers too, then the volume is higher, right? Because you're adding the New York State milk to the total.
Yeah.
So you're charging on it and you're paying on it. It actually goes up, just the way the numbers work.
We do
You
better.
do better if you pay the New York State producers as well as the Vermont producers.
Well, I think when we have that discussion, we've got to certainly spend a lot of time talking about paying those out of state,
Yeah.
for that out of state milk that comes in. If we're going to be charging on that out of state, that product that we're sending out. So,
And Virginia pays out-of-state producers
Yeah.
on in-state sales.
we did with the dairy.
And we did
company.
with the dairy compact. So that would be the basic design.
Yeah.
It is to pay uniformly to producers who are supplying the plants. That would be the basis.
Yeah.
Okay, so last, I did a comparative slide. I'm running out of time. I'm going to leave this alone for the moment. The last piece for Professor Denning's presentation, and here you are, Nick. This is a key point. The volume of our products going out of state is tremendous because we don't have any people. Most of the products that we're making in state are going out of state. So I ran the numbers, population. Here I went, not class 1. These are all dairy products consumption. Everything's in here. Is 655 pounds per person. we're consuming, with this back of the envelope calculation, roughly 420 billion pounds milk equivalent, everything, fluid, ice cream, all of it. Those are the pounds. The plants are producing 2 billion pounds. So it's roughly 20% is being consumed in milk equivalent. If all of the dairy products that Vermonters consumed were being produced by the Vermont plants, but that's obviously not the case. So I did a back of the envelope estimate that, if you buy, I'm advertising for Cabot. Hopefully most cheese that's eaten is Cabot cheese, but if you buy, Kraft cheese, you're not eating Cabot cheese. If you buy Friendly's ice cream, you're not eating Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I went 50%. I don't know the answer to that, but it's it's going to move between, instead of 80% going out of state, it's 90% going out of state. So it's a big
Yeah.
number.
Real Vermonters eat Cabot cheese.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. That's certainly true in my family, and we're probably up above that 655 pounds here in our house. Just saying, we're doing our best.
So, no matter how you calculate it, something on the order of 80% of the products are going out of state. Going out of state. So we're using all this milk in state now. We're using 2 billion pounds total in state, of which Vermont is 80% of it. So big time utilization in state, but big time export of products. So that's our pool. That's our pool. What we do with it, we as a task force have to figure out what we want to do with it, and we've got to figure out the pricing, and we got to look at the impact. That's all from a policy standpoint, market impact. And that's up to us. Whether we can do it legally, that's really the next initial question.
Yeah.
So with that, I ate 10 minutes of your time, Professor Denning, and you can take it back, hopefully on the other end.
May I ask a question at this point, Dan?
Sure.
All right. I'm suffering from overeating numbers this morning, and they haven't all been digested yet. And it's going to take some time for me to go back through the presentation, because I do have a number of questions which I'll save for later. But, my bottom line as I look at all of this, and I realize it's important, I realize it's meaningful, and I've learned a lot from the presentation. But at the end of the day, what I'm interested in knowing is, what are the farmers going to get out of this, and how can I put it in a form that I can understand and the farmer can understand? Whether it be by farm, by cow, by whatever, or by hundredweight. The second thing, though, that I want to know is that although we're focusing on what this means to the dairy industry, we have to also, I think, look at what does this mean to the consumer. And when I come away looking at this, the things that I want to know is, how much is this going to raise the cost of a gallon of milk or a container of yogurt? And then lastly, I want to know, what's the competitive impact that if we do something like this, what's the impact on all of the exports out of state in terms of pricing that would result? And are we in any way making ourselves less competitive in the process? Those are really the key takeaways that I'm looking to get out of all the things that we're doing. And I realize we're not there to be able to get to that bottom line yet.
Okay, well, let's just, as Warner Wolf used to say, we'll go back through the videotape.
Okay.
And so what we're, in your first question, where we want to get to is the equivalent of that. So down at the bottom is the statistical uniform price, Randy. That's the price dairy farmers get paid per hundredweight. So you go through this whole machination of doing a pooling and come out with a price that the farmer sees, right? So we need to do that.
Yes.
Right. And then to that question, so I can end where I started, which is always a good place to end. These, what you just described, we did the pooling. That's the framework. The pricing is you and I both are suffering from numbers. They're leaking out of my ears trying to do this. I couldn't do the pricing and the pooling at the same time. We blow all our heads up, right? So that's the next discussion. We come out with a price at the next discussion, right? But we don't want to confuse the impact on the market. We got to do the same mechanical thing of what the price looks like so we can explain that. Once we see that, then we can look at the impact on the market. And I'm totally with you. We got to look at the farmers, consumers, and the companies on the one hand. And then we got to look outside the market and see what the impact is going to be there too. So we're in complete alignment, and that's where I'm trying to, bring the discussion from an informational standpoint so we can figure out what we want to do. That's the objective.
Yeah.
Good.
And I would finally say, Senator Horrigan told me a long time, you take this, you got numbers, and to digest it, you got to walk around the barn. And after you're done walking around the barn, you'll have some questions. That's why I'm here. Feel free, email, call me. If you have questions on what we've done today, I'm happy to follow up to try to illuminate to the extent I can. Okay.
Right.
And if there are any other questions, otherwise I'm going to turn myself off, which is a happy event for all of us, and turn it over to Professor Denny.
Yeah. He's muted.
You have to unmute Brandon.
I thought I did it. All right.
You are-
I'm Brandon Denning. I'm the Starnes Professor of Law at the Cumberland School of Law in Birmingham, Alabama. And Dan and I have been working together for a few months now, and he had asked me to kind of bring everybody up to speed on sort of the legal aspects of this. So I'll try to talk about the Dormant Commerce Clause doctrine without inducing dormancy in everybody. So essentially, the Constitution places certain structural limits on the ability of states.
Brandon, I hate to interrupt. Can I just give a little more context?
Yes.
And then, okay. So as Brandon said, he and I have been working together. It basically supplied sort of a thumbnail sketch of what we just talked about for the last couple hours, and then asked him to give us the task force directed to give us a legal opinion as to whether the state is going to run into trouble legally, forget the market, just legally, if we go down the road of pricing the milk according to the pooling that I've just described. That's what we asked Brandon to do, which translates into looking into the Dormant Commerce Clause. Okay.
Well, okay. So states essentially can't discriminate against products coming in from out of state, and they can't act in ways that advantage their products in ways that end up disadvantaging other states' products. So the bottom line is that the state is free to set a minimum price for whatever commodity it sells in state. It is also free to subsidize producers of products in state. But what it cannot do is do those things in a way that advantage in-state producers over out-of-state producers. So in other words, you would almost have to include the out-of-state imported products in any kind of pooling plan in order to avoid legal problems.
Yeah, so that extra milk would have to be.
Yes. I think you would have to include that. And, Maine got itself in trouble years ago, as Dan well knows, when it tried a program that essentially taxed everybody, taxed all milk dealers, but only reimbursed in-state producers. And that was a very expensive lesson for Maine, I think.
So with due deference to our southern friend, it was Massachusetts, not.
I mean, I'm sorry, Massachusetts. Yes.
So do you want to you explain a little of the Commerce Clause? How it works, and if you compare the Massachusetts program to what I laid out, including the New York farmers, how that is at issue legally, and also, the primary question we asked you to look at is, does the fact that the Vermont products are sold out of state, sounds like interstate commerce, Ben and Jerry's ice cream, Ben and Jerry's might be asked to pay more per pint of ice cream that they ultimately don't sell in Vermont, but sell out of state. Does that run into Commerce Clause problems or not? And if not, why not?
Okay, so the Dormant Commerce Clause doctrine, basically, it's like I was saying, it's a set of judge-made rules that the court has inferred from the delegation of the power to regulate interstate commerce to Congress. So in the absence of congressional action, excuse me, the question becomes, when states regulate interstate commerce, which they do all the time, are they doing so in a discriminatory manner? If they are discriminating either on the face of a statute or in its purposes or effects, even if the statute is facially neutral, doesn't mention geography, then the state bears the burden of demonstrating that it is in pursuit of a legitimate, which is to say non-protectionist end, and there are no less discriminatory means to achieve that end. Now, if a statute is truly neutral, truly non-discriminatory, then the court applies something called pike balancing, which is taken from the name of a case. And there, the challenger bears the burden of proving that the burden on interstate commerce, quote unquote, clearly exceeds any kind of putative local benefit claim for the law. So discrimination is really the key. That's the pivot. If a statute is non-discriminatory, it's generally going to be upheld. And so neutrality is the key. It's essential that whatever you come up with treats in-state and out-of-state goods equally. Now, as far as the question about whether the fact that a lot of these products are exports, that's not going to matter at all. It's not going to matter because it doesn't matter whether it's coming in or out, or whether you're regulating interstate commerce qua interstate commerce. That used to matter because states were deemed unable to quote unquote directly regulate interstate commerce, and that's not the focus anymore. So it's just discrimination.
So in other words, as long as all of the in-state milk plants are regulated uniformly, the sale of the products from those plants is not relevant to the issue. It's the question of treating the plants uniformly without discrimination or some benefit that to the in-state plant at the expense of an out-of-state plant.
Correct.
And which gets to the issue that, so that's just not an issue here. We're only talking about the in-state plants. But but where we do have an issue is we have some milk coming in from New York, as well as most of the milk, 80% in Vermont, but 20%. It's the 20% coming in from New York. That potentially is that issue interstate commerce wide.
And yeah, and as long as you treat that milk and those producers no worse than your in-state plants, then you're fine.
So then let's take a minute, and if you want, I'm happy to do it since I lived with it, and then you can comment on the difference between what Massachusetts did in the West Lynn case.
Yeah.
And we'll throw in the dairy compact and compare that to what we're Bobby and I have been batting around doing here in Vermont. And then we can talk, Jackie, a little bit what Virginia's doing too, which is really kind of interesting. So,
Well, and I don't know if we're going to have the time, but I think talking about the Pennsylvania piece is
good.
important
Okay.
too, more
Yeah.
than Virginia to me, because they're having challenges with it. And I'm wondering, I think part of that issue was also in-state and out-of-state milk, if I remember that correctly, when they set it up. So that would be a more pertinent discussion, I think, than the Virginia Commission.
Okay. So what Massachusetts did was assess all of the milk that was used by Massachusetts milk plants, collected the money into a fund, and paid that money only to the Massachusetts farmers. And so I don't know if you remember, I don't remember the percentages, but it was the flip side of Vermont, like 80% of the milk
80-20.
comes in from out of state and 20% is produced in state. So
Yes.
they were, and a bunch of that milk was from Vermont. So they were basically assessing a plant in Massachusetts for the milk that they bought from a farmer in Vermont, but giving the money just to the Massachusetts farmers.
That's correct.
So that didn't work. That was a very expensive case for the state of Massachusetts. It was very helpful to me because the Massachusetts people all thought it was going to work. And I bet lunch and dinner all over. And I got a lot of free meals because so anyway, so that's what Massachusetts did. What the Dairy Compact did was kind of the flip side. This Compact Commission assessed all of the sales in the New England marketing area, the 6 New England states, the processors that had sales in the 6 New England states were assessed for those sales. But then the money was pooled out to the farmers, regardless of where they lived. If they most 40% lived in New York State, 40% of the money went to the New York State farmers. So instead of just paying it to the in-state New England farms, it paid to whoever supplied the plants, like a federal order. If a farmer supplied a plant, they got money. So it netted out, roughly 60 cents on the dollar to all of the supplying farmers. What I'm trying to figure out, that's essentially what we're proposing to do here. If New York farmers are supplying a Vermont plant, they'll be part of the payout pool. So it's really the federal order and the compact order. You supply the plant, you get a proceeds, and it's an equity issue and it's a legal issue. Why would you exclude the supplying farms as a matter of equity, other than you're trying to do what Brandon's talking about, benefit the in-state producers, and oh, by the way, at the expense of the out-of-state producers. So that's what Bobby and I have been batting around to do. As far as Pennsylvania is only milk production that is processed and sold in the state of Pennsylvania. So they just don't deal with the interstate commerce problem that Professor Denning is talking about, because they only deal with the in-state market. But it's only 15% of the market. So it doesn't get at very much of the milk supply, but those 15% suppliers are getting a benefit against their in-state producers, Jackie, and that's why it's starting to run into some trouble.
Yeah, and of course, I would just throw in there that the usual lawyerly qualification that the details matter, right? But as a general proposition, as you're designing something, neutrality ought to be the lodestar.
Neutrality and non-discrimination.
Yes.
Jackie?
Yeah, thanks. I have a process question, Professor. I'm assuming that if we're going to try to do this overorder premium, it would have to go through our legislature, but does it have to be vetted and okayed by the federal government regarding interstate commerce, or we just do it and hope they don't sue? How does that work?
Well, I don't think, I don't think that there's a preemption issue. If that's what you're asking, I don't think that it wouldn't be the federal government bringing suit. It would be probably the dairy farmers.
The handlers, yeah. Okay,
John?
thank you.
Professor, I had a question about neutrality. I'm just wondering, does the Commerce Clause, is it looking at, a final consumer product or could something like components, because milk's being broken down into components, or even at a sort of atomic level, at where does it start? Where do the red flags start? So I'm thinking, right, they're components or things like cleaner milk, like you can somehow get around it if we had milk that had, less bacteria in it, or even a climate type of rule where it's like, it has to come from someplace where we have 6 months of winter. It's not saying just Vermont. So have states used it, those sort of things, to get around the neutrality?
Well, yes. So states have attempted that. Occasionally, there was another milk case out of Wisconsin that said that you could only sell milk within 5 miles of where it was pasteurized. So there was no explicit geographic mention, but the court said, well, come on. And the justification was, well, we want to make sure that the milk comes from plants that are up to our standards. And the court said, yeah, fine. So send inspectors across state lines to inspect the plants, but don't come at us with this, artificial 5-mile radius. So even when statutes are facially neutral, if the statute has a discriminatory effect, or the court concludes that it was passed with a discriminatory purpose, it will nevertheless be treated as if, it had an explicit geographical limitation in there.
Okay. But health-wise, can you do that?
Well, you have to show that there are no less discriminatory means. You could cite a health justification, but you've got to show that there's no less discriminatory means than to exclude or disadvantage the out-of-state product.
Okay.
As we go forward with this, are we going to, I'm assuming the co-ops and probably some other representatives from these plants are watching, are we going to bring them in for a Q&A? I know that we're focusing on making something happen for Vermont farmers, but it just occurs to me that if you're looking at Cabot Agrimark and DFA, and in particular, if Vermont puts something like this in for their farmers, and we're generous and do the right thing and cover out-of-state milk, what if it works so well that New York decides to do that, and then Pennsylvania just, this is long-term, but all of a sudden these handlers are paying a fee in every state. And at what point does that get crazy? And that's like pie in the sky, but I would like to hear comments from the handlers going forward. So I'll just put that as a bug in the co-chair's ears. Thank you.
Well, sir. Yeah, certainly, Jackie. I wouldn't even dream of doing this without hearing from all parties that are, have an interest in this, and even the consumers. We need to hear from them as well. But to get started, we kind of had to figure out if we're legal doing this, what other states have done, and was that legal. But so I wanted, and Dan and I've talked about this, wanting to make sure that we all had our feet on the ground and planted pretty solid without just running off and holding hearings and all this without knowing whether something like this could actually happen in the first place. So certainly, it's our intention, I would hope the committee's intention, to hear from all parties concerned.
Super. And also some background. We're talking about doing this and we're listening. So we know California, so we know there's a challenge in Pennsylvania. And I guess if that isn't working, and I know, Dan, you said we get to it the next time around, but I think it's important to find out why it isn't working. I know it's just a small section of the state and a small percentage of the milk, but it is important because those are the questions we're going to be asked in the legislature if this is what we're going to propose going forward. So just trying to I want to keep our feet on the ground. I agree, Senator Starr, but I just want to make sure that we cover all of our bases too. And I'm sure you guys have thought of that.
Well, and for that reason, I'd go one step further, which is that I think we need to hear from the different groups that this might affect, not only for what they think those effects might be, but also what they think of the methodology that we're talking about. I think they need to comment on what I've described and make sure that the basic blueprint that I've laid out, we need to hear from them about that as well. So absolutely, we need to hear from everybody involved. The thinking is to just lay out the basic blueprint to begin with, make sure that we're on a reasonable legal footing. So we're not going forward if we're not on a good legal footing, and make sure that, that the task force is comfortable with that as a starting point. So that's really the point of today. So if task force members have questions, legally where we are, we don't want to go forward if anybody has any, we can go forward, but if to the extent that we can resolve legal doubts, that's our starting point today. So that's
Thank
why
you.
Professor Denning is with us.
Okay.
Mike's online.
So are there any questions or Professor Dang, do you have more comments that you want to give us?
I mean, one thing that I've sort of kicked around too that's relevant is to the extent that you cover everybody, it might be that there would be nobody to have standing to challenge the program. That is, that nobody would be, if everybody's covered, then nobody's suffering any kind of injury that they could complain to in court. And that was just maybe an additional advantage of keeping neutrality and non-discrimination at the fore.
Yeah.
I would think that the one group that, and I don't know how you access them, would be the consumers. Because this might, we don't know, but I'm assuming that it might push up the cost of some of these products. And I don't know if there would be, I know there's a consumer representative on the Milk Commission, but I don't know how we'd access talking to consumers who would, maybe 2 or 3 of them would say, I'd pay however, like, Nick's going to eat however much cheese he's going to eat, and that's not going to be a problem. But given the rising cost of food, just because of what's happening now, if there's even a hint that it might go up more because of something we try to do to help the farmers, getting to that consumer piece, I think is going to be a challenge for us. And I would think that of everybody, those are the ones you don't have covered, because it's going to be a cost. It may probably be a cost increase based on the data. So that group would be my concern.
Jackie, that's why I raised the question a little bit ago about the price that farmers are getting right now for their class 3 and 4 milk. If sales haven't plummeted now, that would be a pretty good indication that consumers are willing to pay the price, because I'm sure the price of cheese has gone up. I mean, maybe I'm a little different, but when my wife goes to the store, if we're low on Cabot cheese, I tell her to pick up 3 or 4 squares of it and bring it home. I mean, it's as high right now as I've ever seen it, or the price paid to the farmers, 23, 24 bucks a hundredweight. And it was back not too many months ago, $16, $17. So that's it. $7, $8 a hundredweight's an awful lot of money. And I don't see us going in that big a direction, even if it's legal and all that.
Well, I think one of the things anecdotally I've heard is that people are still buying dairy products, but they're not buying branded. They're buying store brand as opposed to, so excuse me, the cheese consumption and the milk consumption, such as it is, and yogurt is remaining high or stable. But the challenge is it may not be the Ben and Jerry's or the Cabot or that sort of thing. And so you're right. I don't think we've seen a drop in that, but I'm just not sure how it's sugaring off. I just want to make sure that we're covering all entities. So
Definitely.
it's very interesting what's going on out there.
Oh, yeah, crazy, actually. Any other questions for Professor Denning?
Ask Brady if you want to ask Brady if he has any questions.
And Michael,
He's on.
yeah, Michael O'Grady, it's all I see is your name up there and you're our in-house lawyer. Did you have any particular questions? I know you're not shy and you would have raised your hand if you did have, but I wanted to make sure to cover that base.
I don't have any questions for the professor. I just think, as he noted, the devil will be in the details of this. For example, a milk handler in Vermont is defined as a person that's buying milk for use in the state or outside the state. So you're going to have to look at how you're going to provide the assessment, the overorder on those handlers that you just have to take into consideration things like that, because there's another aspect of the Commerce Clause called extraterritorial effect that the Vermont law can't attempt to regulate activities outside the state. So if you have an out-of-state handler, question will be where the transaction occurs. There's a statute that says that milk in the bulk tank that's transferred to the hauler becomes basically the buyer's title. So I just, there's some details that I would need to think about and work through and how you're going to do this. And
Yeah,
then
no, I was just going to mention there's a case pending next term before the Supreme Court addressing extraterritoriality, and it's been a while since the court has looked at that, and so Michael's exactly right. I mean, it's going to depend. You can't regulate. You won't be able to regulate the price that an in-state plant could pay for milk that it purchased from other states. That's another aspect. And then maybe extraterritoriality goes away. I don't know. We don't know what the court's going to do next term, but it'll be worth watching.
Yep. Any other questions for Professor John?
I just had a question. You might know this, Dennis. That main tier program, why did they uncouple those two payments? One goes into the general fund, and it's a different statute, right? Or it's in the budget or something that then pays directly to the farmer. Was that a Commerce Clause thing or something else?
Do you want to address that, Brandon?
What was the question? The main
Tier, that part of the main tier fee, was it uncoupled, so that that first tranche goes into the general fund, and then the general fund is paying the farmers, since it wasn't a direct payment, right? There was that mechanism that it had to go through the budget, and I was wondering if that was a Commerce Clause thing, or was that some other legal thing?
No, I don't think that's not. I think that's just a function of the politics, probably. I mean, the Massachusetts and Westland Creamery, the fund, and I don't think this made a huge difference, although it did to Justice Scalia. There was a special segregated fund. It didn't go into the general fund. It went into a special segregated fund and then out to the farmers. And Justice Scalia implied that if it had gone into the general fund and just went out as a subsidy, that may have sufficiently laundered it to de-link the tax from the subsidy. But I don't think anybody else thought that.
I think it also, and Michael, you might know the answer to this. It went into the general fund because it's a specific amount, and the state of Maine has to pick up the difference if that isn't paid into the fund. Is that a correct interpretation, Mike?
I think it was probably both, maybe overreaction to the Scalia footnote and probably a constitutional appropriation provision within the Maine Constitution about how appropriations need to be approved by the General Assembly annually. I think that that's something we would need to look at also, where the money would be coming from and how it would be appropriated on an annual basis. I do think the Scalia footnote, because he effectively said that states have their general taxing authority, tax and spend authority, and if you run it through your general fund and the appropriations process, that's clearly something within the state's constitutional authority, and it's not specialized and earmarked for a specific in-state group. I mean, I don't think that that's, as the professor noted, necessarily, really, I don't think it's always going to defeat a bill like that. But if you did that, I think you give the law one extra kind of distance from the constitutional argument.
Any other questions for Professor Denning? No. Dan? Sure.
Just my two things. One, thank you, Brandon, for your time and help. And we hope we can call on you as we go forward. And as Mike as everybody's saying, we put some more devils in the details on this deal for sure. So as we go forward and can vet those details with you. And then my final thought is, as I said to Randy, if anybody has any follow-up questions, I'm happy as we go along to have this be a dialogue so that we have a sense of how this works as a basic framework. And as we move through the process and then start hearing from more people, I'm available to anybody with questions.
Anything else? Our next meeting, remember we scheduled it for Tuesday. So in 2 weeks,
October 7th.
October 7th will be our next meeting date. And if any of you have issues that you want brought up at that meeting, think of anything that should be added, get hold of us, get hold of Mike or Dan, Linda or Michael, and we'll get it on the schedule. Jackie?
Did you say the 7th or the 11th? I have the 11th.
You do have it right.
Tuesday. Okay. Because I won't be there. That's what I thought.
Yeah, you're going away or something, going on vacation.
Dentist. No, dentist.
Well, isn't that like going on vacation?
I wish it was.
I don't think so, Bob.
No. I'd rather be with you.
Good luck to you, Jackie. If there isn't anything else,